A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article for the Thrive On Challenge newsletter called The Dragon, the Goat, and the Cost of Greatness. Now, in this article, I compared the stories of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, a professional wrestler in the 1980s and 1990s, and Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. Now, what I was interested in is not necessarily their rise to fame or even their career standing as one of the greats in the business, but rather it was how they approached the pursuit of becoming great. You see, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat broke into professional wrestling in the 70s, and in the 1980s, he got a significant push in a couple of different promotions, wrestling alongside one of the greatest of all time, Ric Flair. Steamboat in 1989 actually wrestled Flair 3 different times, exchanging the World Championship title in each of those matches. Steamboat winning it for the first time and the only time in his career in 1989. The belt, of course, signifying the pinnacle of the profession. Now, what's interesting about the rest of Steamboat's story is that also around the same time, his wife gave birth to their first-born son, and Steamboat decided that even though he was at the top of the profession, he wanted to spend more time with his family rather than being on the road 6 nights a week as a professional wrestler. And so he told Vince McMahon that was his decision. He wanted to spend some time away. McMahon, who was the owner of the World Wrestling Federation, or as it was known at the time, took offense to that. And eventually this would lead to Steamboat falling from the top of the card and eventually leaving the company. Now, later, Steamboat would reflect on his career with no regrets. He had a taste of what it was like to be at the top. He understood what it took to get there, and yet decided that there was something else that he wanted with his life. Now compare that to Michael Jordan. Jordan, of course, celebrated for winning 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls. And during The Last Dance, the documentary that aired on Netflix during the pandemic, there's a scene that has become iconic when Jordan talked about his pursuit of greatness. You see, he said, and I quote, "Winning has a price. Leadership has a price. So I pulled people along when they didn't want to be pulled. I challenged people when they didn't want to be challenged. Once you joined the team, you lived to a certain standard that I played the game, and I wasn't going to take anything less. Now, if that means I got to go in there and get in your ass a little bit, then I did that. When people see this, they're going to say, well, he wasn't really a nice guy. He was a tyrant. Well, that's because you never won anything. I don't have to do this. I'm only doing this because this is who I am. This is how I play the game. That was my mentality. If you don't want to play that way, don't play that way." And famously, he says, break. As he starts to tear up just a little bit, talking about how much winning and greatness meant to him. Now, as we think about kind of the context of these two stories, I'm not here to argue that one was right and one was wrong. This isn't an ethical argument about whether or not we should pursue greatness. But one of the things that I think as coaches we rarely do is we consider the cost before the payment plan begins. You see, climbing the ladder, I don't care what your profession is, it requires sacrifice. It means time away. It means energy spent. It means long hours. It means hard labor in some cases to get to the top. But how often do we sit back and say, is that really what's best for me? Is it really what's best for my family? Is the cost of greatness really what's best for those who are closest to me in my life? Well, this week on the podcast, we're going to kick that question around a little bit. We're going to ask ourselves, do we know what we're chasing and why? And is there perhaps a dark side to the cost of pursuing greatness?
Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. For any first-time listeners out there, I'm JP Nerbun, the founder of TOCculture.com, and I'm joined by my buddy and co-host Nate Sanderson. Typically, we focus on this podcast, we focus on giving you practical tools and strategies to grow as a leader and build a better culture. Today, we're just going to talk. We're going to talk about something that's been on our hearts and minds for the last while. Not sure that we have any tips for you, but you might be able to resonate with our challenge. If you want to pick up the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, head on over to TOCculture.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can also learn more there about other ways you can get involved in our community of leaders and get support and coaching in your leadership. Enough of that. Let's get into our conversation today. So growing up, from as early as I can remember, probably around age 3 or 4, I didn't just like basketball. I loved basketball. And I didn't just want to be a basketball player. I wanted to be a great basketball player. I had dreams and aspirations of one day playing in the NBA and playing college basketball. But I didn't just have those dreams or aspirations. I actually put in a lot of time and work to achieve that. And eventually, I got to walk on at the University of South Carolina. And that took years and years and years of sacrifice. And when I look at all the time and effort that I committed to try to become great at my sport, and when then I look at what we're asking of the average high school athlete today, 20 years later, I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned for my kids that this could be their experience, right? Even if they're not even that interested or that passionate about basketball or whatever sport they're pursuing. So as my kids are getting older and they're starting to get active in sports, there is a growing fear. And there's kind of a part of me that doesn't want them to be as committed or interested in playing sports or in some particular sport as I was, because I recognize what that might cost them and cost our family. And that's really honestly missing out on a lot of experiences that I think my wife and I would really value trying to provide for them that are outside of just sports itself. And I think at the end of the day, there is this obsession with greatness, right? If you play a sport or if you play the piano or you're in the theater, the only path is the path to greatness. And if you're not on that path, then you're a failure or you're unambitious or, why would you get on any other path than the path to greatness, right? I think we kind of are critical of people that don't try to choose that path or that aren't as ambitious. And so I fear that we don't really reflect on what this is costing us. We're not reflecting on what it's going to cost our kids and cost our families. And I think we've got to spend some time reflecting on this. And I think that's what we really want to talk about today, Nate, is just really, what is the cost of excellence, of this pursuit of greatness? And what are some other alternatives to coaching, to playing sports? Is there a different path that we could justify?
JP, I think a great case study would be for the title of your third book to be The Pursuit of Mediocrity. And let's just see if we can sell as many copies as we have for your first 2 books, because there just isn't an appetite for it. There's shame, as you mentioned, for somebody saying, like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and I apologize for using a professional wrestling reference here, but a guy that makes it to the top, wins the belt, has a young kid at home, sees what's in front of him. I got to be on the road 6-7 days a week with the guys. I don't want to miss out on my kids' experience, and says, you can have the belt back, and drops back down to the mid card, doesn't make as much money as he could, doesn't become one of the top 5 wrestlers of all time, doesn't become as wealthy as he could have, because he saw the cost of greatness before he wrote the check, right? And I think that's one of the things that's so frustrating. And I think that's one of the things that scares the shit out of me as a parent who, I've got a 7-year-old that tomorrow, as of this recording, Adelaide is going to go to her first basketball camp at Mount Vernon. And there's part of me that's really excited. It's going to be my first opportunity to coach her. And there's part of me that understands this is the first step into the next 10 years of an activity-based life and schedule for our family. And I don't know what that's going to look like. And I don't know what toll that's going to have on our family. I don't know, as you said, if our kids become really involved, as I see other kids around, are we going to provide the kind of experiences that we want to as a family? Or we're going to have to make some difficult choices about where sports and activities should be prioritized. And I don't really know how to navigate that. What I do know and what I do see, and this is kind of what spurred the newsletter article and our conversation today, is I think that we embrace in our sports culture the pursuit of greatness, period. We don't think about the Mamba mentality being for, one of the greatest basketball players, one of the most devoted human beings to their their task or to their job ever, right? In terms of Kobe Bryant. And we tell a 14-year-old, that's trying to play 3 sports at Mount Vernon High School, you got to have the Mamba mentality. Give me a break. Like that's not apples and oranges, right? And that doesn't serve that kid. But we justify that as coaches. We justify asking kids to go play club basketball or club volleyball or privatize, get some trainers or to, do extra open gyms and watch extra film and do extra practice. And we justify it by saying we're trying to be great. We're trying to be excellent. And I'm just not sure that's always what's best for kids, what's best for my kids, what's best for my players. And I think that's a very difficult conversation that doesn't get a lot of traction on coach Twitter.
One of the things that I think is even more concerning to me now is I think years ago when you were really talented, people might place this expectation on you. Hey, you really got to fulfill your potential. You could go somewhere with that. You have this ability. And a player like myself growing up who had some strong ability early on, people, it was, I think in a lot of ways, it was a healthy encouragement, right? Hey, you're talented at this, if this is something you're interested in, you might be able to get a college scholarship out of it, like you could keep doing this for a while. So there was, I think in many ways, there was a healthy encouragement, and at different times it probably became unhealthy. My fear now is that this expectation of pursuing greatness is not even just for the really talented individuals that kind of come into our programs or our teams. It's almost this expectation that's placed on every athlete. If you play high school athletics or you play basketball or softball or volleyball at this school, you will pursue excellence. You will pursue greatness. You will commit to your entire summer of football practices in 110-degree heat for 6 hours on end. And you can't work a summer job and you can't go on a family holiday, or else you're not committed and you don't want to win a state championship and you're not not the type of player that we're looking for. It's become this expectation that we're throwing on every kid that walks through, our gym and says, "Oh, I'd like to play basketball. I'd like to play football." And then we have this huge rollout of what we believe it should cost them. And if they don't want to pay that, we question their work ethic or their desire or their ambition. And I think that's what scares me, is that there's no longer very many opportunities for talented individuals or even just average individuals that want to play for their high school team or, play after high school. There's not a lot of opportunities for them to do that in a way that's a little bit more balanced in their life.
I think an extension of that, JP, is, unfortunately, just the mental health aspect of those kind of expectations, because it's not just, your primary sport, then you play a couple other sports. It's not just being good enough in the classroom. You have to be great. There's an expectation to be great at everything. And we've seen prominent collegiate athletes that have taken their own life and in some of the things that they've written and some of the things that other athletes who have said, yeah, I've been there. I can relate with what they were going through. They talk a lot about the expectations and the pressure and always having to be perfect and always having to show up for this, that, or the other. And it just, at some point, for too many athletes, became unsustainable. And because they didn't have a way out, because they didn't have a way to have that conversation, because it was taboo, as you mentioned before, to say, no, I'm not really sure that I want to be all conference because I kind of want to go skiing with my friends, or I don't want to do this year round. Then all of a sudden they get into a place that they don't know how to get out of. And that's obviously a worst case scenario. But I think this is one of the other things that's so hard about greatness. And this comes out of the Michael Jordan story we talked about in the opener, is that Jordan looks back, right, and says, well, I guess I was an asshole, but you know what? It's okay because we won. Do I care if my teammates are still my friends? No. Why? Because we won 6 championships. And you don't like that? It's because you never won anything. It's like winning is the only thing that matters. And I just don't know that that's right. I don't know that that's healthy in terms of what people pay to pursue to be great before they even recognize that they're making the payments. I don't know if that makes very much sense.
So Nate, that does make a lot of sense. I mean, honestly, it kind of ties in a little bit with my story. where I was struggling with mental health as a high school athlete. And I remember there for being multiple years where, I mean, I never spoke to anybody about it, but I wanted to quit. Like, I didn't want to play anymore. The game had changed for me. It was no longer fun or enjoyable, but I continued to still show up and work hard. And I know a lot of people might say, oh, that's great. You push through and there's going to be droughts. And I think there is a lot of value in that of, when you're trying to chase a dream or something, there's going to be tough moments and you've got to push through those moments of self-doubt, those moments when you think, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? I think for me, the problem wasn't that I continued to play basketball and I should have quit and should have gotten off that path to greatness or to excellence. I think the problem for me was my pursuit of greatness, my pursuit of excellence changed. As a young boy, as a middle school athlete, it was about, I loved this game and I wanted to be around this game. And I enjoyed getting better. I enjoyed seeing myself improve. But then as time went on, it only became about the external validation of others. I wouldn't tell anybody that I was going to give up on that, or I had the desire to quit basketball because I didn't want to be embarrassed as someone that gave up on a dream, right? I only continued to pursue that because I was seeking that external validation through my achievements and all those acknowledgments that comes with being great at your sport. And it lost that purity. And I think that's where it becomes unhealthy. This pursuit of greatness is when we pursue it for the wrong reasons. Now, in addition to the mental health cost, I think the reality is at some point, when you do so much of anything, it starts to lose its joy, right? And it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. It's not worth committing a lot of time and effort into something, but sports are supposed to be fun. It's the number one reason people play it. But when you put somebody out on a field or a basketball court for 3-4 hours a day, 9 months of the year, 10 months of the year, all year round, whatever it is that people are going through, at some point, they're going to struggle to enjoy it. Even the ones that are being paid millions of dollars for it, like our professional athletes. I just read, The Sixth Man by Andre Iguodala, and, him talking about how the grind of an NBA athlete. He says, I know we're supposed to be grateful because we're getting paid millions to do the thing that we love to do. But for every one of us, at some point, it loses that joy and it becomes this job. And it's just this kind of inevitable thing that happens to maybe every professional athlete. And he even talks about how you're not supposed to talk about that because you're just supposed to shut up and be grateful. But I think it's the same thing we have for our players here. Is like, you get to go out here and play and experience this. But at some point, when we are demanding or our expectations become so much on this pursuit to greatness, the pursuit to the next championship, the sport that people love, and from my own experience, that we enjoy doing becomes work. And also, when we start to demand that much time, I think a lot of our young people miss out on experiences in life that provide a lot of value. And just the most simplest one that jumps out at me is the summer job, or it's participation in maybe some other pursuits or interests they might have outside of sports, or it's multi-sport athletes, right? There'd be more and more pressure for specialization. And so I think really at a certain point for most athletes at the level that we're pushing them and the level that we're creating expectations in pursuit of greatness, it is creating a negative experience and that's why I think a lot of athletes are obviously leaving sports.
Well, I think what you've said there, JP, kind of hits the nail on the head for me. When it comes to the potential darker side of pursuing excellence is what is left in the wake. I'm not saying this is the reason why 70% of kids are quitting sports by age 13, but I'd say it probably has a role. I look at kids that play 3 and 4 sports, 2 or 3 of those sports overlap, that have stress fractures and injuries of overuse because they're chasing greatness. They're expected to be excellent in every sport that they play, and their body pays a price. We talked about the mental health of just the constant grind of the pressure. Like, there's just all of these potential pitfalls that I just don't think get enough attention because the cost, the sacrifice, or the reward of being great is just celebrated above all else. We spend a lot more time rehashing the story of the one, who made it to the collegiate level or made it to the professional level, and go back through and look at all the things that they've done and pay very little to no attention to the 99 that burned out along the way, that got injured, or that fell out of love with their sport, or whatever it might be, right? And we don't ever ask any questions about those guys. We just say, here's the template. Ray Allen shot this much every day for his whole life. Well, that's his job. It's not my 14-year-old point guard's job is not to shoot, 500 shots a day while playing 3 other sports and being a high school athlete and hopefully being a good sibling and a good daughter and, role model in the community, et cetera. Right. And so to me, where is this conversation going? I think it comes back to this question. As a coach, it really has caused me to reflect on how much am I part of the problem? I really think about that a lot with, again, my daughter on the verge of getting into some of these things. Hopefully she does want to play basketball. Hopefully I do get to, to coach her as she's growing up. And I think that will be a fun experience if we can figure out how to do it right. But I don't want to be a contributor to the problem. I want to try to figure out a way to be good, to have a chance to go to the state tournament, to coach kids that enjoy basketball, that when they're done, they're going to miss it. They're not burning out, that have the choice that if they want to keep playing, great. And if they don't want to keep playing, if they want to retire from basketball at age 10 or 15 or 18 or what have you, that they're supported and that they're encouraged because they found what's best for them. I'm not sure I know how to do that. And I'm not sure there's very many good templates. And I think, as you and I have said repeatedly here today off air, this is a hard conversation because I've never heard anyone else have this conversation before about an alternative to chasing greatness or a balanced approach to excellence. And I think as a coach and a father, I feel some responsibility. I'm not sure what to do with it.
So here's the thing. I mean, usually we enter into a lot of commitments in our life, not even just sports, but we enter a lot of commitments and we don't really sit down and say, hey, what's this going to cost me as far as not just money, but as far as time? And I think it's so valuable even for us as coaches to say, hey, I would love to be a great coach, but I'm probably not going to be, Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr, coaching my team to an NBA finals. And I'm probably not going to make millions of dollars doing this. Right. So what am I willing to commit? And I think for us as coaches, this could be, in season, I'm willing to commit, 1 hour to 2 hours of film 3 nights a week, so that we maintain better balance there. I'm willing to commit this much time for our team to practice. I'm willing to commit 3 to 4 weeks in the off season. That's it. The rest of the time, I'm going to be encouraging my players to do other things out there. But I'm also going to be doing other things with my family, with my kids, right? Whatever that is, I just think, you could do basketball or soccer, whatever sport you coach 10, 11, 12 months of the year, 5 hours a day. That's fine. But just make sure that you know what that's going to cost you, what it's going to cost you when it comes to, your own health, your own, relationships with your family, with your friends, and maybe other things that are of interest to you. And I think a lot of times what happens though is in coaching and in sports, we end up paying the price. We end up taking on this cost. And then I think we become burnt out, or we just become disgruntled and complain nonstop about, how much this job, about how much it costs us, or is it even worth the cost, which we've talked about it before on this podcast. But I think it's just going into your experience, whether you're a parent or a coach, and asking, what am I willing to give to this sport? What am I willing to give to coaching? And being really clear on that.
That's a worthwhile reflection, certainly when it comes to, finding appropriate boundaries for us as coaches. Again, I just cannot escape as a coach looking at through the same lens for my athletes and asking, what am I asking them to give to the sport, to the team, to our program, and being cognizant of the cost. And I think this circles back a little bit to kind of what you talked about in your own story. I don't necessarily want to tell basketball players in our program, you shouldn't play AAU basketball. I think there can be value in that. I also know players that have burned out, have had terrible experiences, that have paid too much money, not gotten out of it what they wanted or what they thought they were going to get because they were sold a bill of goods that they didn't understand up front. And I think when I think about how do I frame that decision, or when I'm starting to build out a third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade program, and I'm thinking about kids that also want to explore softball and they also want to explore volleyball or whatever other activities that they might want to do, how can I create something that provides those players an opportunity to enjoy the game, to get better, to position them in a place where if they want to continue and they want to be successful in the middle school level and the high school level and perhaps beyond, that we're providing enough training for that avenue to be possible, but without making the cost restrictive in terms of time and commitment and money and finances, resources, whatever it might be, where players have to make a decision when they're 10 years old. Well, my only chance to play basketball is if I do this, this, or this. Guess that means I'm not going to be able to swim. Guess that means I can't do band lessons. I guess that means I can't do, X, Y, or Z. That's what I want to try to avoid. Or at the same time, be as transparent upfront as possible with our players, with our family, with our own kids to say, look, if you choose this route, here are the potential benefits. Here are the potential costs. If that's what you want, then at least you're going into it with your eyes wide open rather than, well, you've done this up until fifth grade, and now this is what it takes in middle school to be able to compete at high school. And if you don't do it, you're going to miss out, and everyone else is doing it. And so you're kind of going to forfeit your opportunity. I don't want to do that either. So I think for me, JP, that's where I really struggle. And that's where I'm spending the most time on my lawnmower thinking about is what is my role as a coach in creating a balanced experience for our athletes that allows them to grow in the game without asking for a commitment that can become damaging down the road.
Well, this is where I would encourage some coaches that are listening to this that maybe have some similar thoughts and some similar struggles that we have as far as just kind of being a little bit uneasy around this cost on pursuing greatness here. And this would be my encouragement for these coaches is to consider redefining what greatness is for your team, for your athletic program. Instead of measuring greatness by championships and number of players that go on to, play Division I or go on to the pros, to start to look at factors around multi-sport, multi-activities. How many of our kids are involved in another sport, involved in another activity? Looking at a solid academic record, how many, GPA, those type of things. How many of our kids are involved in community service, summer jobs, other type of clubs within our school or in the community? The level of enjoyment and the experience, take time to poll, ask players, before the season, end of the season, scale 1 to 10, just simple little reflective type things around how much they enjoyed their experience this season, and see if you can continue to raise that number, raise that level of enjoyment in the program. Participation and retention. A lot of times I do encourage coaches to shrink their number down as far as their roster, but there may be some programs that, and in some schools that it better fits to have, hey, we're looking about getting as many kids out here as possible. We're looking to retain kids because we just want them active. I'm not saying this is how you have to define greatness. I'm just saying here's some other ways that we could define it, and we could pursue, and in that pursuit, I think will actually create more balance for young people. That being said, if you're in a situation where you got to win to keep your job, or hey, you do define greatness when it comes to winning a state championship, sending off kids off to get full ride college scholarships because they have that talent and ability, which many of the coaches that we work with are in that that area. I think, back to your point, we just need to be really, really clear what this program costs. You want to be a part of this team? This is what it's going to cost you. You're going to give up Christmas vacation, right? You're going to give up summer vacations. You're going to give up the ability to have a summer job, right? And this isn't for everyone. If you don't want it, that's okay. right? That's okay. And really making sure that we communicate to those individuals like it's okay if they don't want that. This isn't for everyone. It shouldn't be for everyone. And I think that's really, really important as well, too. So however we define greatness, I think it's really about making sure we know, first off, how we do define it, how we're going to measure it, and then making sure that it's very, very clear to everyone what that cost is going to be in the pursuit.
Well, JP, I think you're right on there. And if I could add one other thing to that, again, challenging myself as a coach, working with athletes that on the spectrum of wanting to be a performance high level basketball player and those that want to be out for basketball for the experience or to be with their friends, what have you, is that in the same way that we celebrate somebody that says, I want to play college basketball, I understand the cost. My family understands what that's going to mean in terms of our commitment to training and club and not going on vacation here and there, whatever it might be. And we celebrate that. And we say, awesome. We set high goals and we chase it. And if someone were to say, I want to be a role player on the basketball team because I want to, specialize in volleyball. And I understand that means maybe I don't play as much, or maybe we aren't even going to be as good as we could be if I don't play club basketball, as an example. Could we celebrate that in the same way? Somebody that comes to that decision with their eyes wide open, who has a conversation and says, it's just not the most important thing to me, but I want to be part of it. I want to add value. I want to be with my friends. I want to be part of the team. And to say, that sounds like a really healthy decision for you. Those stories aren't told on Twitter, JP. They're not in our newsletter. They're not celebrated when somebody says, I want to be more balanced in my life and I want to do less. Maybe that's part of the role and the responsibility that coaches have, particularly transformational coaches that, again, want to start from a place of the well-being of the athlete first, where the sport makes a difference in their life. It helps them to not only learn those skills of devotion and commitment and sacrifice, but also decision-making and counting the cost and recognizing what's healthy and what's not, where boundaries should be and where they shouldn't be. And maybe that's the role we have to get better at. Maybe that's the role that I have to get better at. But at the end of the day, I just think that just using greatness as a justification for adding more and asking for more, whether it's us as coaches or for our players or for our kids, it's going to become unsustainable if it's not there already. And I don't know that at the end of this podcast that we have a great solution. And I apologize to the listeners for not for not coming down to 2 action points that make this thing better or make it go away. But I do think that it's helped me find a place of, I want to be part of a solution. And I'm motivated to try to figure that out. And maybe we got to revisit this conversation down the road, JP, as time goes on. But it's worth having the conversation and doing the reflection for the benefit of coaches and for the benefit of our athletes.
So a few years back, I wrote an article for Athletes with the tagline, "Greatness isn't for the chosen few, it's for the few that choose." And I wrote that to motivate athletes, but also let them know what it costs, kind of as a disclaimer. But I think there are definite undertones to that article that if you don't want to pay the price, then there's something wrong with you. And I think that's kind of a cultural message we've been talking about here today, Nate. And that's just not the case. Like, there's nothing wrong with a person, if they don't want to choose greatness in their sport. I think there's value in just being upfront about the cost with people, though, and allowing people to feel safe saying, no, that's just not for me. And when I look to the future, for my kids, for my children, I think I just really aspire for them to be great people that are loving, people that are kind, selfless. And yeah, they work hard, but they have a balanced life. So anyways, enough from us. That's it for this week's episode. Great news. Great news. My newest book, The Culture System, which has taken many years to really come together. It comes out this week, the week of this episode. And I'm going to have a link in the details of this episode for you to purchase. You can be one of the first to get it. I really believe it's a great off-season read for coaches. So I worked really hard to make sure it came out here in June. Next week, Nate and I are going to actually discuss the book, as well as give you some background information on why I wrote it, and how it might be able to help you as a coach. So check it out. Link will be in the details of this episode.